Hello and welcome to Crosstalk Radio. My name is Brian Matora, and with me, as always, is Brock Wiggum. How you doing, Brock?
Good. Back at it again after a year.
Yeah, what you been doing for the last year?
You know, just in hibernation. It's cold up here in the winters in Wisconsin, so it's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah, didn't you also have a baby?
Yeah.
Well, not you personally.
Right. Yeah, he's doing good. We had a baby, me and my wife, and I think I helped out. I think I helped out a little bit with that, but yeah, he was born at 24 weeks, and he's doing great now.
Can you describe how you helped?
We'll
you want to fill everybody in on how you helped out?
We'll leave that in the blooper segment.
Yeah, should we call Jody and ask her how you helped out?
Right.
So it has been a while since we have done a podcast, but I happened to see Candice Conti on Nightline, and I was just so impressed with her in the way that she handled herself. I thought, wow, we got to do a podcast and talk about some of this. Did you see her segment, Brock?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, what did you think about it? What are your initial thoughts after seeing that segment?
I was thinking it's about time. It amazed me that the Watchtower's got away with it so long, and how this hasn't been in the front news it's taken this long for this to really peek its head and create general interest amongst the mainstream media. So yeah, that was my initial reaction. Was I wasn't shocked, but I was relieved that finally the light is coming. Finally, the mainstream media is taking a look and seeing that the Watchtower and its bad practices needs to be reevaluated. So.
Yeah, it's as if the devil's getting his due right about now. Mm-hmm. I, like you, was really surprised, but not surprised that it took so long for one of these news organizations to pick up on what's happening over at the Watchtower, because they have for years and years and years talked about other religions, particularly the Catholic Church, and the problems that they have with pedophiles and child molesters and things like that. And they have been saying, oh, we are Jehovah's clean organization. Nothing like that would ever happen here. You need to leave the Catholic Church because of everything that's happening over there. And I remember I started out in apologetics probably about 10 years ago now. And 10 years ago, I knew about the pedophile problem that they had within the Watchtower organization. And it's such a relief to see the mainstream media picking up on this, because you have to think about all those kids right now under the thumb of the Watchtower Society with nobody going to bat for them. Or hardly anybody, I should say, going to bat for them. There are organizations like Silent Lambs, and there are lots of apologetic organizations that talk about it. But really, in the mainstream, nobody is going to bat for these kids trapped in this cult.
Yeah, and I remember you think about kids, kids in we have our own church, and we have our own children's ministry at church, and leadership really has to set the tone for the protection of the children, because children don't think about these things. They don't think about, possible risks associated with, because, we have protections within our own church, Brian, where we purposely don't let kids roam the halls, because we really don't know who is roaming those halls when church is going on, but kids don't think about that. They just want to play. And, we have protections as leadership to assure the parents that, hey, these are the precautions that we're going to be taking with background checks with anybody that's in children's ministry, and among many other things. But leadership has to set the tone for protecting these children, because really they don't think about those things. Children, we don't want to expose our kids to unnecessary evils that are unfortunately a part of this world. And hopefully things like this will really shock the Watchtower into action. And instead of trying so hard to protect its organization, now they should try really hard to protect their children that are their future leaders themselves.
Yeah, that's really a great point, because this is one of those things where you have to put the organization on the back burner and focus on the kids themselves, because they are the helpless ones in this situation. Like you were saying, we have very strict child protective guidelines at our church, where people who work with children are background checked. They can't just, roam the hallways and go places. I mean, there's always somebody looking over them. We make sure that they're never out of sight of somebody who is watching over them. And because ultimately the buck stops with the leadership, in this case of the church, because we are the ones that are inviting these kids in and telling the parents that this is a safe place to come. So therefore, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we do everything we can within our power to make sure that it is a safe place for them to be. And the Watchtower seems to have failed miserably on this. And the thing is anytime you do anything where children are involved, whether it be children's ministry, whether it be daycare, whether it be school, whether it be what the Watchtower does at the Kingdom Hall, even though the kids are kind of mixed in with the adults, you have to recognize that that is a place that pedophiles are naturally going to be drawn towards, because that's where what they desire is. And so the Watchtower has so fallen asleep at the wheel when it comes to the pedophiles. But even worse than them falling asleep at the wheel when it comes to pedophiles is the covering up and I don't even know what to call it other than covering up. I mean, they are blatantly covering up what's going on in the organization right now. They are flat out lying about it. And one of the things that really struck me with the Nightline interview was the Watchtower did not want to come in and comment. They were offered a chance to comment, but they wouldn't do it. Now, Brock, why do you think that is?
I have lots of theories on it. I think the main reason is because the case speaks for itself. The evidence speaks for itself. And you don't want to go on record contradicting yourself. So the best way to go about it is just strict avoidance. And not to say that they haven't been avoiding the subject altogether, because on the Jehovah's Witnesses have their own news media program now. It's called JW Broadcasting. And right there you had one of the governing body members last month talk about rumors of pedophiles. Was it just rumors of pedophiles in the congregation, and just calling them flat out lies? So he overgeneralized it, and I find it interesting that he would just call every single case a lie without having, without even the cases being finished yet. Most of them, a lot of them are still in litigation. So yeah, that's interesting.
That shows a lot of compassion for the victims, doesn't it? To call the victims liars, or the potential victims liars. Mm-hmm. But to call all of them liars and to say that is it really a despicable thing, and it's not becoming of Christ, I don't think.
Well, it's so obvious. Like even even if we're in the real world, if you have cases that are pending outcomes, you can't just say that they're all lies, because you don't know the facts yet. So it doesn't even seem like it. What it shows to me is that you have an organization that's more concerned about protecting the reputation of its organization more than the victims of the crimes. I think a more correct response from the leadership should have been really taking the high road and saying, and talking about how much Jehovah loves and cares for these children, and the organization is going to be here as much as possible to support the powers that be, the justice system in any way possible, to make sure that these families get taken care of in any way possible. That would have been taking the high road, instead of just blatantly just making a broad brush generalization and saying, oh, they're just rumors and they're just lies.
But isn't that their pattern? Because I remember seeing an episode of The Simpsons. Oh gosh, it must have been 15 years ago, and Homer had gotten in trouble for something, and he went and hid under the coats, and I think it was Bart came in and said, "Why are you hiding under the coats?" And he said, "I'm going to hide under the coats until everything goes away." Uh-huh. And isn't that essentially though what the Watchtower Society does? I mean, think back to their false prophecies. Let's pretend they never happened. Mm-hmm. Let's say we didn't exactly say this. It's almost like the Clinton thing. Well, what does his mean? And that's kind of what they do. So they're silent, and they figure if they're silent, if they don't talk about it, eventually the other people will stop talking about it. And so I really think that's the reason for silence. I'm sure they're going to hide under, well, there's pending litigation going, and it's like, well, yeah, there kind of is, but you've already been found guilty. It's just how much money she's going to get. So it really has nothing to do with whether the man molested her or not. It just has to do with how much it's going to cost you, and how much it's actually going to cost those people putting their money in the little box at the back of your church. Mm-hmm. So that shouldn't be the reason. And I like what you said about how they should take the high road. But has the Watchtower Society ever taken the high road?
Absolutely not. I mean, there's examples of cases where they've lost their cases because of not showing up to court, not supporting the system. Watchtowers had to appeal decisions, appeal after appeal, and then they're given court orders to show up and give testimony, and lawyers don't show up. And so the judge sides on the prosecution. And, you look at that as evidence for, okay, something's going on here. But think about what the Watchtower demands of people that are being disfellowshipped. If I'm ordered in the judicial committee to show up by the Watchtower, but through a panel of elders, and I don't show up to that judicial committee, within their own laws, within their own bylaws in the Watchtower, if you don't show up, the Watchtower arbitrarily makes a decision of guilt by non-cooperation. They assume you're guilty, and you just take that same logic and apply it to the Watchtower's actions in a lot of these court decisions. Just not showing up, not defending themselves, really sheds a lot of light on, their own character and their own patterns.
Yeah, it does. And that's a really good point, because I hadn't thought about their own judicial committees before, how demanding they are. And, when they say someone is guilty, that person is guilty, losing their family, losing all sorts of things, where they don't even sit down and hear evidence the way that you would in a court. I mean, they are the judge, they are the jury, they are the arbitrators of what evidence gets in, what evidence doesn't get in. And certainly not anywhere near as thorough as Candice Conti's case was. Yeah, or as a secular court. Now, let me ask you this, because I have to say I was blown away and thoroughly impressed with Candice Conti, because she went on that television show and she told her story, and she did it with such grace. Mm-hmm. And she did it without being mean, but with, while still telling the truth and kind of, telling it the way it is. Everything about her interview, I thought was outstanding. What a great spokesman for victims of child abuse. What were your thoughts?
I think it's a reflection of her character. I've spoken with Candice Conti on one occasion. She called me up, and from what little I know about her, I know that she's a person of integrity, and I'm glad that she's really the one that is I would say the spokesperson for the abused, and I'm glad that she is, because for her it's not about the money. For her, it was about making sure that future victims do not get preyed upon by the organizational policies. And I like how Nightline brought out in Candace's story, Candace really was silent for a long time, didn't want to say anything. And in many respects, I don't blame her, because it can be a shameful thing. I've spoken with many witnesses who are victims of abuse, and you really just want to bury it yourself, don't want to think about it. But when Candace saw him on as a child predator, she wondered how much more people are victims of this man. So that's what caused her to speak out. It was not about the money. And because of that, you see that instead of the Watchtower putting a gag order on her and accepting a settlement, she just let it go to court and let the process go through. And that's what I saw in the interview. Is I see her as a person that's willing to stick with the integrity of what she believes is the right thing. And it's going to be setting an example for future cases as well, I believe. Absolutely.
And her integrity and in the way that she handled things and the way that she risked it all to make sure that she would continue to be able to speak out is so courageous. And I just admire her so much, and all that she's done and all that she's been through. And I think she is going to be a tremendous spokesperson for victims out there. And not only that, but I think she's going to be a tremendous inspiration perhaps for people who were abused and who are afraid to speak out. And I see a lot of victims coming out of the woodwork due to what Candace has done so far. And I think she's going to just keep going and going and going. At least I hope she does. Now, let me say this too, because it just struck me as I was thinking, and that's why I kind of lost my train of thought, is here you have Candice Conti, this dainty, young lady, and then you have the governing body of the Watchtower Society, these big, grown men who are supposed to be bold for God and bold for Jehovah and everything. And here they are sitting like little church mice in a corner, afraid to speak, about what's going on. Yet here's Candice Conti, saying, I'm going to speak. I'm going to, if I don't speak, the rocks are going to cry out. And here she is. The contrast is just amazing to me. Amazing. So thank you, Candice.
Yeah, definitely. She's a courageous woman. I do thank you, Candice, for bringing this to light. And I just encourage you to keep going, just be that voice for the ones that are silent, those who have been suppressed, because she knows as well as we do that whatever the abuse is, that could be sexual abuse, that can be even through shunning. That's a form of abuse as well. There's many abuses within this organization that people are just enduring. They're just taking the beatings. They're just rolling with the punches. And this is, I think, is going to be a domino effect. You said to me 2 years ago, Brian, you said, this is going to open Pandora's box. When one voice speaks out, more are going to speak out. And it's not going to stop at sexual abuses either. It's going to go to the next stage. And it's going to go to shunning. The world is going to see the true face of the Watchtower, just like it did with Scientology. And I think the direction next is as the world, or as the... I shouldn't say the world, because that's the way the Watchtower uses it, but as the outside world views the Watchtower and exposes light on the real practices of the Watchtower, I think the grip of the Watchtower on its rank and file is going to be even tighter. They're going to expose their authority. They're going to have a grip that's all that much more firm as the pressures and the lights and the truth begins to expose them.
Right, because they're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to do that. I really think... Let me roll this back in my head a little bit, because I remember when this whole Candice Conti thing first started out. And if you're to go back, and I'll just put this into kind of a religious realm because they're a religion, but there was Martin Luther, who was this huge spark in the Reformation. But prior to Martin Luther, going all the way back to the 1300s, and then even before that, there were these other people who came before Martin Luther, and then Martin Luther, really kind of just threw the match on all the gasoline that was spread all over the place and started the fire of the Reformation. And I think the same thing is more than likely true with Candice Conti. I think she is kind of the Martin Luther of this whole anti-Jehovah's Witness movement, because you had all these people who came before her. I think of Barbara Anderson and all these other people who were kind of spreading that gas around and everything like that. But now we have Candice Conti, who goes on Nightline, and I was so thrilled to see the language that the narrator, or I don't know, what do they call that guy who does it, the host, or whoever did the segment, whatever the guy's name is, news guy. I was so happy to see him use words like secretive and, these words that really were painting the Watchtower organization in the light that they deserve to be painted. I mean, he was beginning to use the right brushes. It wasn't just, this is a very devout group of people who sacrifice to go door to door, and he wasn't speaking of them that way. And I was like, wow, dang, yes, finally someone in the secular world sees what's going on here. So now they'll be shining the light on the Watchtower as well. And that I think was a really big move, because you see these other articles or these newspaper articles about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's always like, okay, they're just kind of hyper religious is all they are. Really great people, just a little kind of hyper religious. And I'm so happy to see the tides turning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you notice that other segment too when they confronted Candace's should I say alleged abuser? I don't, because he's been found guilty. He's been found guilty. Okay, yeah. So her abuser then, he was put on the camera, and he just flat out denied it, right? And then his wife comes out. And, they're standing on the sidewalk, which is completely legal to do, and she starts calling the police. And I find that very funny, because being raised a Jehovah's Witness myself, the police are a part of Satan's world. Yeah. And you are not to be you can't even be a police officer and be in good standing as a Jehovah's Witness. Yet here she is, and calling the police, making use of Satan's resources, in order to get the news reporters off the sidewalk.
Yeah. Satan's on my sidewalk. Call Satan to get him off.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is about what it's like. Yeah, but that is an irony, isn't it?
Very.
And you know what else I just loved about the Nightline show was that whole scene where he confronted them. And here once again you have Candace just doing such a great job. I mean, just being so gracious about everything that she's saying and looking so sane. Let me just put it that way. I'll put it that way. She looked absolutely sane. Everything is great. And then you have those two who look like complete nutters, man, to borrow from my English friends. But they did. They looked like they were crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would be embarrassed if I were a Jehovah's Witness watching that, and just to see her reaction. And on top of that, I find it kind of a little bit of an irony, being raised in the organization. What's the first thing that you do when you encounter persecution? I listen to examples of people in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. You pray to Jehovah, let him get you through this. And look at what was this woman's first reaction?
Call the police.
Doesn't pray to Jehovah. She calls the police. It's so funny. Just the true colors really shine out. You just see it right there. And not to see, I don't want to make a broad brush generalization about all Jehovah's Witnesses. That's not what I'm trying to say. But, when push comes to shove, witnesses know that there's a problem within the organization. And the ones who don't, I think this Nightline report will at least get them to ask the question, do things need to be reformed, rather? And I think you're right. When it comes to Martin Luther, Brian, you know very well, Martin Luther didn't set out to destroy the Catholic Church at first. He wanted to reform the church because he knew that there was issues, doctrinally or otherwise. And it turned into a outright revolution is what it turned into, a complete change. But I think that's kind of where Candace started out too. If she would forgive, if I'm on the right track here, I don't think Candace came out to destroy the Watchtower. I think she genuinely wanted reform at the beginning.
Right, exactly. And Luther, didn't set out to necessarily destroy the Catholic Church when he started out. And so, yeah, that's not what I'm saying, that she's, looking to destroy the Watchtower. She may or she may not be. I don't know her personally, but I think her actions are really going to propel the revolution forward.
Right.
And I think that the press is probably going to continue in this, because one thing that the press doesn't seem to like is they get suspicious when you stonewall them. And here we have, the Watchtower stonewalling the press. And I think that they would be wise to dig deeper, because the more they stonewall, the more you got to wonder, okay, what else are they hiding? Mm-hmm. And I wonder that myself. I mean, we kind of know about the level of abuse, and we don't know how high the level of abuse is. We know it's very high, though. But I wonder what else is going on there. I wonder what kind of financial things could be going on. I'm not so sure they're very forthright with their financials. I don't think they're forthright with a lot of things, and it would be interesting to see a good investigative reporter go after the Watchtower Society, somebody with the backing of a major news outlet, to go after them and to see and to start digging and to start probing and to find out what all the skeletons are, because I am sure that they are many. I always hear that the governing body members don't make a lot of money, or all this stuff. They're just these humble guys, and but they wear pretty nice suits and have pretty nice watches and have pretty nice rings. I see the way that they're dressed and everything, and I'm like, well, that doesn't look like a guy that walks around with a plunger in his hand all day.
Right.
He looks like a guy who's pretty well taken care of. Mm-hmm. And you even just look at their offices, and it's like, that's a pretty nice office, man. It's a nicer office than I have, for sure. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to JW Broadcasting, and we're going to start giving kind of a Christian perspective on some of the stuff going on in JW Broadcasting in hope, by the grace of God, in the months to come. But you and I were talking earlier about JW Broadcasting and how it used to be like, well, the governing body members, they're just humble men. They're just like you and me. People don't even really know their names. And now they're kind of front and center in this new JW.org campaign. and they're front and center on the internet now.
Yeah, you're seeing a huge twist in the culture of the Watchtower right now. And when I grew up, I didn't know much or anything about the governing body. We went to a convention, and I happened to meet one of the governing body members, Brother Sidlick, only because my parents told me he was a governing body member, and I said, well, what's a governing body member? I didn't know much at all. And after that was the release of the Proclaimers book, which you saw somewhere hidden within the book, all the members of the governing body at the time. But that's the only exposure I really had to them. And anybody that grew up in the organization knows that a big part of the bragging of a Jehovah's Witness is the fact that you don't know much at all about the governing body. And that's because it's not about the governing body, it's about Jehovah. And I hear this stuff like a mantra growing up all the time. Now you're seeing, with the rise of the internet, and you see huge publicity campaigns with the Mormon Church, where the Mormon Church has done a masterful job at branding. The way they sell their religion, Mormon.org, and you see the apostles of the Mormon Church front and center representing the organization, lots of exposure, normalizing the religion. And I think the Watchtower, in a lot of senses, is taking their cue cards from the Mormon Church. They have the JW.org brand. It's become their new logo. And what you're seeing, just like the Mormon Church, where the leaders are front and center of the LDS Church, you're seeing that in the Watchtower now. The governing body is now the front and center. They're the spokesman. Now they're becoming the face of the organization. It's their new branding. So that's what I'm seeing, Brian. I'm seeing a new culture change, if you will, where the governing body is now becoming the center and the mouthpiece.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it all develops, and looking forward actually to going and watching some of these JW.org presentations. I've watched about 5 minutes of one so far, and I threw up a little bit in my mouth. I had to shut it off, and it's been a few months now, and I think I might be able to go back and listen to a little bit more. But we hope to see you. Funny. But we hope to be back soon with some fresh podcasts. So we are going to sign off for now, but be well and God bless.
God bless.
For more information, please visit our ministry website at www.contextministries.org.